Philip. I know some of you from essay writing or ACT, so it's good to see you. I'm glad you know. If not, today the plan is just kind of going over the road to college and like what some of the big deadlines are and the big things that we want to focus on. We've got a mixed group of ages, so I think there will be different parts that are more relevant to you depending on where you are in that journey, but I think there will be important information regardless of where you are. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you guys probably know, this process is really a 4-year process. It begins early and it takes a lot of time. Obviously there are things that we want to do regardless of where we are, things like strong study habits, things like having a group of friends or similarly motivated peers that can inspire us to do really well. We want to have discipline and routine. We want to have confidence and ambition, and maybe most importantly, we want to have interests and hobbies outside of the classroom, because colleges want to see more than just a really good GPA. They want to see leadership, they want to see success in sports, they want to see involvement in your church group. These are all things that signify to them that you're an interesting, bright person that they will want to admit to their institution. At the same time, you can't just do this on your own. There is a part that your parents can play a big role in. That involves their support and encouragement. That involves maybe they're paying towards your college fund and contributing towards that. And maybe most importantly, they need to show a willingness to push you, whether that's academically, whether that's socially, whether that's making sure you're at the right school with the right sort of support structure. These are all ways that this preparation can begin early and take quite a long time. The second part is knowing how to explore and understand your particular options for universities. What I always like to say is you should spend as much time assessing the colleges and universities that you apply to as they spend assessing you. So you want to be just as thorough in looking at those universities as they are looking at you. So for example, you want to look at schools that align with your academic, social, or financial goals. Prestige should not be the only factor when you look at those schools. Obviously there's a lot of great prestigious schools, but when deciding between two schools, just assuming that the one that is more prestigious is going to be better than you isn't always the case. There might be a school that really fits your interest. So for example, I have a family friend who was very interested in a specific type of social history, and they got accepted to both Harvard and the University of Minnesota. Now you would assume like Harvard is going to be the more prestigious, better school, which it is for a lot of people, but the University of Minnesota had a very specific social history program that is the best in the country. And this person ended up going to the University of Minnesota. They ended up doing exceptionally well. They are published in multiple important history magazines, and they have been one of the leaders in this social history field, largely because they chose a school that was a better fit for their specific interest than the more prestigious school. So always keep in mind like what you want out of your education and what's important to you, and often you will find a school that matches that. Some of those things might be the location, the size, the tuition, what kind of scholarship or aid package you get. These are all reasons you might want to attend a particular school. And then on top of that, there might be specific cultural elements of a school. Like maybe you want to go to a school like Georgetown or another Jesuit institution that really prioritizes learning through faith. Maybe you want to go to a really big school like an Ohio State or a Wisconsin that has this great campus spirit and campus culture that's really important to you, like having that camaraderie of a football game or a basketball game. Or maybe you want to go to a school that emphasizes small class sizes with personalized attention, more like a high school than a college in some ways. So these are all reasons you might consider one school versus another. None of them are right or wrong. It's really what's up to you. So once you've done all of that, what you want to do, and I know some of you have started this already or are even done with this, you want to narrow down your list of schools and create a list combining match, safety, and reach schools. The hope is that you have a proper balance of schools that are both reaches, that maybe you have a chance of getting in, a good healthy amount of matches where you have maybe about a 50% chance of getting in, and then at least a couple safety schools that you can rely on in the event you are unlucky and can't get into any of your match or safety schools. Do not have all safeties, do not have all reaches, because you'll find yourself not too happy with the results you have, but that goes without saying. As we've talked about, this planning process needs to start early, and it can and should start early. When you're a freshman, you don't need to be expected to know exactly where you want to go or what you want to do, but what you do want to do is focus on your academics, focus on joining some clubs or specific extracurriculars, focus on your sports, focus on laying that foundation for what's going to be a very appealing or attractive resume later on. And it's also okay as a freshman to take some risks and try things. Like if you want to take a really hard class and you end up getting a B or a C, that's not great, but it's better for that to happen your freshman year than otherwise. If you end up taking that hard class junior year and you get a C, that's when colleges might look at that more favorably. But if you're a freshman and you want to try some hard class, you want to push yourself, that's when it's okay to take some risks and it's okay to fail, especially if it means you're going to grow and continue to build yourself that foundation. Then sophomore year is where you want to start refining what you do. So if you like chess club and you want to hone in on that, you do that. If you like dance club and you want to hone in on that, you do that. Maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's another sport. You want to figure out what your interests are both in the classroom and outside of the classroom and start honing in on those. This is also where you want to start elevating your GPA. So if you maybe didn't do as well as you wanted to with that transition to freshman year, sophomore year is where you want to start bringing it up, ensuring you're doing well, bringing the average up, because in the long run, that's going to help you a lot. Finally, for some students that are feeling especially accomplished and they have their foundation, it may be time at the end of sophomore year, or maybe even the start of sophomore year, to start preparing for the SAT and the ACT. Now, if you're still struggling getting acclimated to the sophomore year work schedule, you might want to wait until the summer, but for some students, it's the appropriate time to start at the end of sophomore year and begin their test prep. Junior year is where it gets really stressful, as I'm sure all of you who have gone through junior year know. That's when you start researching colleges. You continue your test prep. You might even take your test prep in the spring of junior year. Some people take it in the fall of senior year, but a lot of people do it spring of junior year. You start thinking about what you want to do, and then hopefully you're also obtaining those leadership positions or those higher level positions in your different clubs so that you can really start differentiating yourself. Maybe the most important thing that I always like to recommend on this list for junior year is by the end of junior year, you should know which teachers are going to write your letters of recommendation, and you should talk to those teachers before the end of the school year. The reason for that is these teachers are going to be doing you a great favor. They're writing you a recommendation letter. You should give them the whole summer, enough time for them to write it. Not only is that more polite, but if they have 6 months to write it versus 6 weeks, it's going to be a much better letter. So try to make those connections with your teachers by the end of junior year and go and talk to them, ideally in person, but some people like to send emails too and say, hey, can you write this letter for me? 99% of the time they're going to say yes, especially if you give them the whole summer and part of the fall to write it. So that's one thing I would definitely take away from this one. Finally, you've reached senior year. In some ways, the first semester of senior year is almost a little bit easier than the last part of junior year because it can get pretty chaotic. But hopefully you'll finish up your SAT and ACT exams. You'll also have your applications finalized. Your teachers will have sent your application letters to the schools or the Common App, and then by December 15th, you'll start getting some decisions from various schools, and you can decide, hey, which one's for me? Do I want to keep applying in the regular round, etc.? And you can make those choices once you've done all that hard work, the other 3.5 semesters or 3.5 years of high school. Cool. So let's zero in right now on the different extracurricular activities that you might want to pursue and how this community engagement matters. So there's a number of different ways you can bucket the extracurricular activities, whether it's academic, creative, athletic, social impact, cultural, professional. I mean, you guys have all seen these in your high school and your life. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but the point is colleges want to see what we sometimes call an inch wide and a mile deep expertise. It's kind of a cliche saying, but it's like you can have an expertise that's a mile wide and an inch deep. Basically, you do a lot of things, but you're not great at a lot of them. Or you have this inch wide, mile deep expertise where you find 1 or 2 extracurriculars or hobbies that you're exceptional at, and you go super deep, you go a mile deep on them. So that's really what you're trying to show with your extracurriculars. You don't need to be the president of 10 different ones or a member of 10 different ones, but if you're the president or the leader of 2 or 3 and you make a really big impact in that particular group, that's where you really differentiate yourself. And the way you do that is you find a group that you're passionate about and that you're good at. If you're not good at debate and you're just doing debate to try to put it on your college app, you're not going to do well, you're not going to become the president, you're not going to become particularly highly ranked in that club, and so you're not doing yourself a very good service. You should focus on, hey, what's that group I'm good at? What's this volunteer organization that I'm passionate about? And naturally, the leadership positions and the success will follow. So the reason we include all of these is there's a whole wealth of different things you could do, whether it's sports, volunteering, cultural clubs, faith groups, Model UN. These are all different ways you can show that inch-wide, mile-deep expertise, and it's really about finding your own path to that success. So now we gotta go to maybe the most stressful, least interesting part of this, which is standardized tests. Unfortunately, they remain very important. You guys, if you had maybe applied to school 4 or 5 years ago during the pandemic, that was like the one period where standardized tests got deprioritized a little bit. But in some ways, they're almost more important than ever, because as more and more students apply to colleges from all over the world, these universities are looking for anything they can to differentiate students, and an easy way to do that is standardized test scores. So those of you that have started the prep process or are thinking about it know that the two main ones are the ACT and the SAT. They're quite different. The ACT is changing as we speak. There are different advantages and disadvantages that might be good for you depending on the test. So you should explore each of the tests and see which one might make them more sense for you. And also think about, as the ACT changes, does that newer version make more sense to you, etc. That's a conversation for a later day, but always have that kind of on your radar. The earlier you can start, the better. As I said, a lot of people that are advanced can start their sophomore year, which is great because that usually means they can finish by the end of their junior year so that they can fully focus on the application process in the senior fall. But of course, there are a lot of successful people that start that prep journey a little later. They take the test in the fall of senior year and they still go to great colleges. So it's really just a personal preference. There are, you may have seen, some test optional schools. A lot of times test optional means test optional but test encouraged. Like they still would like to see a test, or if you have a really good score, it would be worth sending that test. But that also has been phased out at some schools as well. So if you really are trying to avoid the SAT or the ACT, I'd say you're probably out of luck and you do need to take it. Again, if you had applied 4 or 5 years ago during the pandemic, a lot of schools went test optional. Not the case anymore. Finally, preparation is everything. As I said, the earlier you start, the better. The more you practice, the better. It's really like any other skill, especially a skill as kind of technical as test taking. The more you do it, the better you're going to get, the more comfortable you are. So the earlier you start, the better. So some of you, this will be review the application process. You've already gone through it or are very familiar with it, but for our freshmen and our sophomores, this might be very new to you. So you might be wondering like, hey, what does this look like? When does this process start? So generally, you want to start your applications once you've completed your list of schools. You don't want to say like, oh, I want to go to this school, I'm going to do the application while you're still thinking about what schools you want to go to. That's not really the most effective way to do it. So you want to compile that list and then start with your like earliest or target schools first. From there, what you want to do is complete your early applications first. This is pretty obvious. If you have an earlier deadline for one school than another, it's good to do that application first. And then the other thing, and this is probably the thing I'd most recommend from this portion is, and I've told this to a lot of you that are applying early that I know, even if you apply early, try to finish your regular applications before you get your early application result back. And the reason for that is if you get bad news in that early round, you don't want to have to force yourself to write those regular decision applications when you're in that headspace of like, oh, I'm a failure, I didn't get in. It's very hard to motivate yourself, and you can create some poorer quality work when you're operating from that headspace of, oh, I didn't get into my first choice, I'm a failure, I'm not going to get into a good school. The other thing is, just from a convenience matter, if you get all of your regular applications done by, say, December 15th, when the early one comes out, you can pretty much relax over Christmas break and then really go into your last semester of high school relaxed, ready to enjoy your friends, ready to kind of grow as a person because you've done all the hard work, you've gotten the applications out, and that will be a really big stress saver. It's really hard once you finish your early apps to find that motivation to keep going and do a couple more applications, or maybe more than a couple depending on the situation, but I promise you it'll make your life a lot easier. Some best practices to keep in mind besides that, it's good to prioritize your earliest or hardest applications first. So if there's one you're really struggling with that has a lot of components, do the hardest one first. This is one I like that I know a lot of you have used, is like reusing the frameworks for some of your applications. So a classic example is maybe you get a question that's like, why do you want to go to this school? You can use the same types of criteria for each school, and so you can use like the same structure for each application for how to use that one. Or maybe they say, tell us why you want to do this chosen major. You might have a particular story or a reason for why you want to do that particular major. Maybe it's a 300-word question at one school, maybe it's a 400-word question at the other school, but you can just repackage the main ideas or the main story from each of those applications to make your life a lot easier, so you're not starting net new at each school. Finally, and this would be a great tip for my sophomores and maybe my juniors in here, it's often good, like 6, 10, 12, sometimes 24 months before you start applying to college, start making a list of some of the different things that you want to include in your application. These could be different stories, different ideas for your Common App, different traits about you that you think are essential, and it can be helpful to just in your backpack have a little journal of some of those ideas, like, hey, I had this experience with my friend today that I think shows how I'm, an honest person. Or I had this experience with a teacher today that I think really shows my passion for medieval history, which is what I want to major in. Keep that journal, keep those notes, and what you'll find is over that 1 to 2 year period, you'll find yourself with a pretty big list of stories or characteristics about yourself that can be inspiration for why you want to do a particular major or why a particular school. It's not uncommon for people to have 10 to 12 little stories that could be the start of their Common App essay if they keep this journal. And it sounds more intimidating than it is, like, oh my God, I have to always be checking this journal, but it just, put it in your backpack. If something comes to mind, you write a sentence or two. If something doesn't, you just kind of forget about it, but it will make your life easier if you have even just a couple pages of those ideas. Cool, so that's actually a nice segue to the next question, which is aligning your strengths with your chosen major. So obviously, most schools are going to ask you to pick a particular major that you want to pursue. And for these schools, it's really important that you align your strengths with that major. So, if you're doing a STEM program, you're going to want to highlight your mathematical or your science abilities. If you're doing a liberal arts college or maybe more of a humanities major, you're going to want to highlight your more humanities-oriented skills, maybe your writing, your critical thinking, your reading comprehension. You don't want to be applying to a history program and be talking about the computer programs you made and vice versa. For those of you that are applying to schools that are asking you to not select a major, or where you choose to put undecided, that's totally appropriate at a lot of schools, saying, hey, I'm an undecided major. What you want to show there is sort of your wealth of interests or your wealth of expertise. So if you're applying to a school and you say, hey, I'm undecided because I haven't really thought about it and I'm not really interested in anything, that's bad, obviously. I don't need to tell you guys that twice. But if, say, you have a lot of interest in English literature and also interest in biology and also interest in economics, and you're saying like, hey, I'm interested in all three of these. I don't know which one makes more sense for me. I'd like to take a lot of classes in these three areas to decide which one is best. That's the type of thing colleges will look very favorably on, because they'll say, oh, this student is engaged in a lot of areas. They've exceeded in a lot of areas. They're well-rounded. And the reason they're undecided is not because they're unprepared or they're lazy. They're trying to decide what makes best sense for them. And in fact, maybe they'd be a good candidate for a double major or a minor in these areas. So you want to make sure the story that you're telling and the strengths that you're showing align with your major, whether that's undecided, a math or STEM major, or more of a humanities, liberal arts major.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
go
do
ahead.
have a point to add.
Please, yeah.
I do know that the UIUC right now, if you wanted to get into undecided major in order to transfer to a computer science program, that's not workable anymore for UIUC. So because they wanted to select the most top students for their computer science program, as is really in the top 5 in the United States. So they would prefer you to directly apply for the CS major instead of apply for undecided.
Yeah,
so
that's a great point. Yeah, there are a lot of, and this kind of varies by colleges, there are some different competitiveness with certain majors. So computer science at UIUC might be really, really tough to get into if you're applying for that major, whereas other schools it might not be as tough. So that can be another factor to consider, how tough is my given major for getting in? Would I be happy with my second or third choice major if I attended this school? Or am I better off just going to a school that I know for sure I can get this major? So yeah, it's a great point. Cool. So now I want to talk about what we think sort of our strengths are. And obviously we might associate strength with GPA and test scores, which is one of the strengths that's important. But this falls under academic strength, which I really think is one of the 3 strengths that we need for applying to college. So academic strengths, most straightforward, GPA, test scores, do we do well, do our teachers like us? That part's easy. But the second kind of 2 areas are this idea of interpersonal strength as well as character strength. So interpersonal strength is what we might call our emotional intelligence. Like, how do we respond to situations that are difficult? How do we manage egos or difficult people? Do we bring people together? Do we respect people from other backgrounds? Do we understand like the big picture of things besides just the written material? This is a skill that colleges really, really value because they sort of see that as essential for the world today, this interpersonal skill, this emotional intelligence. So it's hard to show that on an application, but where that can be shown in your leadership ability, in your volunteer abilities, in the recommendations that your teachers write, maybe they have stories about you that show this interpersonal excellence, and it also comes up in your interviews as well. So it's not just your academic strength, it's also this ability to bring people together and be a successful human and someone who hears and listens to people. The final part of that, which is related but kind of its own strength in and of itself, is this idea of character strength. Like, are you hardworking? Are you tough? Do you learn from mistakes? Do you ask for help in a productive manner? Do you give feedback and receive feedback well? These sort of show your resilience as a person as well as your ability to respond to challenges. Because at the end of the day, what colleges are looking for is they're looking for someone that they can drop into their community and they know that they can succeed. So that's going to be someone that, one, has this academic strength, can they do the work? But the 2 other components, which are just as important, are they going to be an integral or a productive member of our community and bring people together and add to the community? And then in addition to that, are they going to be someone that we can challenge and we can push and we can throw a lot at and can respond to living away from home for the first time or coming to campus not having any friends or not knowing anyone? Do they have that resilience and that character to overcome this new situation of colleges? So this could all be kind of described as leadership, initiative, and hunger. Like, we could think about these 3 skills in a more focused way when we think about these things. So your leadership, that's your EQ, that's like, do you take on difficult things? Do you lead people? Can you solve problems from an executive position? So that's what you're looking for when you have these extracurriculars. Do you have that leadership? But then there's also this idea of initiative, which could tie back to both your academic strength as well as your character. Like, do you do things on your own, not because they're told for you to do, but because you want to do them? Do you seek out things to solve? Do you have a problem at your school or in your community that you make an effort to solve on your own, not because you want to join a club that does that, but because you personally want to solve that problem? That ties into this other idea of hunger, which could go to like your initiative to solve things, but as well as your hunger to learn. At the end of the day, the colleges want people that want to learn, that want to take their classes, become involved, and then eventually, become representatives of that institution in the world, whether it's in the workplace or people who donate to that school. And one of the ways they screen that is, are the students hungry to learn? Do they want to learn? Do they want to use the resources of this particular institution? And I think this particular skill is the hardest to show to colleges. It's very easy to show your GPA and your test scores and your leadership. But can you show them that you are desperate to learn, that you crave new information, and that you're going to use whatever resources that institution has for your personal benefit? That's really the key thing when it comes to your application. So all of this can kind of be connected to what ideas you show in your personal essay and how you best develop essays. So we've already talked about keeping that journal as a great way to start the brainstorming process, but when it comes to the personal statement, you really want to think of this as an opportunity to tell your story about what makes you unique. It's very rare in this process that you get to talk directly to the admissions person. Your teacher's recommendations, your GPA, all of that, that's sort of an oblique way of talking to the admissions person. But with the Common App essay, you get to personally talk to them directly. Here's my essay about myself. Here's why I think I'm an interesting, relevant person for this particular university. So it's a really cool opportunity to tell your story that you don't get any other place in the application. So it's a chance to like highlight what makes you, you. But what I always like to tell people is that it's a story, it's an essay. It's not like a resume or a cover letter. You don't want to list your accomplishments over those 600 some words. What you want to do is tell a story that can't be captured anywhere else in your application that shows who you are. So that is what really can set you apart. That's where we can see that hunger or that initiative or that emotional intelligence that isn't captured anywhere else. It's like, it's that missing piece of the puzzle that can really strengthen your application. We then get to this idea of supplemental essays, which depending on the particular supplement, can be more of like a resume or a list of your accomplishments, or it could also be more creative. So for example, I don't know if anyone in this room is thinking about or going to apply to U Chicago. U Chicago is famous for having supplemental essays that are very, very abstract and ask you to think very critically and creatively. I think in the past they've had a supplemental essay that just says, define X. And you have to say, how do I define X? Am I gonna take this a math way? Am I going to take this a linguistics way? Am I gonna take this a personal way? You know, what is X? That's what they're asking. And so in that case, you have to really get pretty abstract and creative in your thinking. Other times you might get an essay question that is like, why should we admit you to this particularly competitive major? And in that case, you might want to list your accomplishments in more of like a resume format and say, hey, I should get into UIUC computer science because I have the best, technical computer science abilities among my peers. So it really depends when it comes to that supplemental essay. Is it going to be more of a narrative and a creative essay, or is it going to be some kind of resume or cover letter like thing? Throughout all of these essays, what I cannot stress enough is that you should be authentic. If you are cliche, if you are recited, if it's kind of a bland list of things, that will really, really set you back. You're looking for something that captures your own voice and tells a story, not something that just lists. Maybe the most important part as it relates to that is to avoid common topics and cliches. So a lot of people have activities like, say, sports in their life that are important. I've seen a lot of good essays written about sports, but there's also a lot of kind of cliche and bad essays where it's like, I had this sports difficulty that I overcame and that taught me, a metaphor for life. That's the exact type of essay that they don't really want to see. The same thing with like, oh, I did, some service trip and that opened my eyes to, the importance of humans helping each other. These are the types of trite, cliche essay topics that they've seen time and time again that you want to avoid. You want something that's authentic to you, that is unique to your voice and unique to your experiences. And if you do that, I think you'll have a lot of fun writing it, or at least more fun, because this process is pretty stressful. I'm not going to say it's fun, but you'll have more fun and you'll also tell something that's more authentically you. Finally, and this goes without saying, you want to review and edit. Have your peers, have your teachers, have tutors revise and edit, because the more eyes you have on it and the more chance you have to prepare, the better it's going to be. Okay, so after you've done all that, it might be time for you to gather your materials. So your transcripts, those are usually sent by your schools. And it will be done through your chosen application, whether that's like the Common App or the Coalition application. We'll talk about that in a sec. Some schools will ask you to submit directly. It really depends on the school, as you've found, and as those who have done this have probably found. Different schools have different procedures, so you should always check what your procedure is for your given school. Letters of recommendation, those may be sent in directly to the schools, or those may be submitted through the Common App. Again, it depends by the schools. Ideally, I probably should have mentioned this in the slide when we were talking about recommendations. When you think about what teachers you want to have to write your recommendations, you'd ideally like to have 2 separate teachers plus your college counselor, because some schools will let you submit up to 3. Some schools will just want 1 or 2, but most schools will say up to 3. So if you can get the 3 letters of recommendation, that's generally better. And then within that, if you can have one of your teacher recommendations come from a STEM teacher, a math or science teacher, and then the other one come from like a humanities, history, English teacher, that's generally the best balance because it shows the well-roundedness of your background. Again, that's an ideal world. We can't always count on that. Sometimes teachers are busy, they don't have time to write so many recommendations, or maybe you are just really strong in STEM and you don't have a great relationship with an English or a history teacher, but that's the ideal standard if you can get it. And then of course, You'll submit your essays, which we just talked about, and then the application forms. What I would say with application forms is do not sleep on how annoying and long these can sometimes take, even within the Common App. There's lots of boxes you have to check, lots of different things you have to do. I've seen situations where you have to write an essay that is under 300 words, and you check it in Google Docs and it's 299 words, and then you paste it into the Common App and it says it's 305 words because Google Docs doesn't count hyphenated words as 2 words, but the Common App essay counts them as 2 words. So then that person has to cut 7 words out of their essay at the last minute, a few hours before submission. So always look at the form and make sure you've checked all the boxes on the form and played around with it, because there might be unexpected results like that particular story. To that end, you want to understand the different components of your application. So you want to decide if the school uses the Common App, the Coalition, or its own type of application. I would say for most of you, Common App is the most relevant, it's the most common still, it's the easiest, although different schools are using the Coalition. I would say just stick with the Common App because all things being equal, they're the same. And then of course you have schools like Georgetown and some of the schools in the UC system that have their own application apart from the Common App. Usually it's the same type of information, it's just a little bit of a different format, so it doesn't take that much sort of extra information or work on your part. Filling out the personal information section as well as the extracurricular activities and hobbies does take a little bit, especially the wording for your extracurriculars and your hobbies. So you want to make sure you're leaving enough time for that. Again, do not wait to the last minute to do this. This could be the type of thing if you're a little burnt out working on essays, but you still want to be productive on college stuff, you can do this to take a little break from working on essays so that it's done and ready to submit by the time you finish your essays. Be sure to track deadlines. You know, generally all schools apply early and regular around the same time, but there can be differences per school, so keep an eye out that, especially for EA versus ED deadlines or in-state versus out-of-state deadlines. These all vary, so be sure you're double checking everything and making sure everything's correct there, because after you've done all this work, it would be a shame to have an unnecessary headwind because you didn't check one box or check one component. For some of you, it may be time to apply for financial aid. This can be done a number of different ways, depending on the school and depending on your situation. You may want to submit the FAFSA form for federal financial aid. There's lots of tools on that website that can be helpful for planning your financial journey as soon as freshman year. So if you think you will be pursuing that later on, even if you're a freshman, you can start looking into that right now. You might need a CSS profile depending on the school for financial aid as well. And then there also might be scholarships at the particular school that you're attending for certain majors or certain types of students. Again, those really vary by state and they vary by school. They also might be merit-based versus need-based. So the biggest takeaway I could say for the financial aid component of this is plan, start early, understand the landscape of what's available because there's a lot of stuff out there, and make sure you're making the right decisions for yourself. There's no one centralized area for this. So it comes from a lot of different ways, and if you're thorough about it, if you're planned, you can make sure you're leaving no money on the table, which is the most important part. Finally, once all of that's done, you can submit. As I've said a lot, I think it's super important. Be sure to check every box and confirm every requirement, because again, you don't want to punish yourself unfairly because you missed one small thing. Be sure to check for updates. Those might come via email. You might get an update that says, hey, expect a decision on Friday. You might get an email that just comes out of nowhere and has your decision. You might get an email that says, expect a decision in this window, or expect a phone call in this window. Totally varies by school, but just sort of keep it in mind. In the case of an early round deferral, so say you apply to a school early, you get deferred, which means you're going to get considered in the regular application pool, but you're not outright rejected. It may be relevant for you, and I would check with the school's admission on this to send some additional information. So let's say you're a chess player, you have been doing really well in chess, and then you apply to a school, you get deferred, but in that time period between your application and your deferral, you win the state championship in chess. It may be important for you to send the admissions office an update on your application and say, hey, I have a relevant update. I just won the Illinois State Championship in chess. I would like this to be added to my application. Most of the time they'll say, wow, this is great, like, we will add this to your application. But again, check with the schools, because some schools might say, nope, once you apply, we don't really want to hear anything else. It's too complicated for us. The other thing I'd say is, I said exceptional updates. So if you have gotten a 4.0 GPA your whole time and you get deferred, and then you get a 4.0 your second quarter of the first semester, it's not relevant to send them, hey, I just got another 4.0. That's not an exceptional or an unusual update to your application. They know that, they've seen that. If they want to see that, they can always call your school and check that. It's really if there are some extraordinary things that you think are worth adding to your application that are gonna push you over the edge, that's when you let the school know. For some of you, after you submit an application and while you're waiting, you may get contacted for an interview. What I would say is interviews are really quite unpredictable. Some schools will really try to get an interview with every candidate. Other schools will say, no, we'll try to talk to people, but it's not really essential. And then other schools will not interview at all. This has changed a little bit with the prevalence of Zoom interviews. It used to be they would only interview students that they could talk to in person. So let's say you were applying to a small liberal arts school on the East Coast. There's not a lot of alumni in the Chicagoland area, so you probably wouldn't get an interview. But if you lived in, say, New York City or Boston, there'd be a lot more alumni that could talk to you. That's not really the case nowadays, because Zoom has made it super easy. So they just kind of varies by school with whom they talk to. What I would say is, just because you don't get an interview doesn't mean your chances are bad. And just because you do get an interview doesn't mean your chances are good. It's very unpredictable. And you should approach the interview just like you do any other process in the college process, which is try to do your best, but it's not the deciding factor. Then at this point, you'll wait for your decisions and try to decide which one's right for you. For those of you that applied early, you know that December 15th date is usually when you find out from the early round. They'll also notify you for the regular round in spring, whether that's middle of March, end of March, etc. You'll often receive lots of offers, especially if you apply in the regular round, and then it becomes time to weigh those offers, decide which one's right for you. You want to consider all those things like school fit, financial aid package, campus life, etc. Maybe you get into your second choice major at your first choice school and your first choice major at your second choice school, and then you say, okay, which one's for me? Hard to say. And then maybe most importantly, if school does offer admitted student days or online sessions where you can get a sense of what campus life is like, you should absolutely do those. Because if you get a chance to go to campus and see what life is like for a couple of these schools, chances are that will tip your decision in your favor one way or the other. Try to prioritize, as I said at the outset, the school that's the best fit for you, both academically, socially, and financially. It's not just the most prestigious or the one that's going to be the most fun. It's which school combines all of these elements in the most holistic way. Once you've done all that, it will be time to accept your offer and send in your deposit. There may be some additional forms for both financial aid and scholarships, depending on the school. Again, it totally varies, not a clear-cut rule for each school. One thing I always like to tell people is, for your parents especially, make your plans for parents' weekends as soon as you send the deposit, because a lot of times flights and hotels get really expensive for parents' weekend. So if your parents want to come out for parents' weekend, it's good to book those literally as soon as they send the deposit, because they'll save a lot of money. The same thing for those of you that are going outside of state and may fly home for Thanksgiving break or Christmas break. Flights are crazy expensive then, but if you book your flights ahead of time, you can save quite a lot of money. You're going to want to start planning for housing and any pre-orientation programs. Sometimes you'll get assigned a dorm, other times it's incumbent on you to find your own housing, so you want to make sure you're thinking about that in the most proactive way possible. There may be some pre-orientation programs. I would highly recommend those. These vary by school, but they're basically programs where you can come and meet students in an informal environment before classes start. I think it's a great way to get to know some peers and kind of ease that transition. The group chats and Facebook groups of admitted students are a really great way to connect with people and just hear updates. You'll also find who you don't want to be friends with in these, because there are some very annoying people that are constantly posting all the time and asking very silly questions, but it's a good way to just, put some faces to names and know a few people and get any questions answered. And then if you have any peers or alumni from your high school, maybe family friends that are attending that particular institution, it can be great to connect with them too, because they can help ease that transition as well. Finally, it's very hard to sometimes be mindful and think about what's going on during this process and how cool and exciting it is. So take some time to celebrate at the end and appreciate all the hard work you've done, because it's a very, very long journey. It's at least 4 years when you think about it, and so you should never lose sight of that particular fact. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of everything. In terms of questions and resources, those of you who are juniors and seniors are probably very familiar with the Common App website. That's a great central source of information. You've got FAFSA and the scholarship database here. Those are great financial aid websites. Again, those of you that have started test prep, you're very familiar with the College Board and ACT websites. Unfortunately, both of those are pretty poorly made, but they do have some good resources there. You have your own college admissions counselors, whether at CPC or your high school. I actually think the Forbes, the US News, and the Princeton college rankings can be pretty helpful. They can be good for screening things, understanding which programs make more sense, what's like the vibe of a particular school. And then I actually think, for those of you that like Reddit, the different subreddits for each college and applying to each college can have some great information. Because students might post like, hey, these are the questions I got asked in my interview, or this is something really interesting that a tour guide at this particular school said that made me think this is why I want to go to this school. So there's actually a lot of good, informal, but very, very detailed information on like Reddit and those other types of channels for the different universities. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Good luck, regardless of where you are on this journey, and I hope this was like a helpful kind of overview of the process, regardless of where you are. But I'll take any questions if people have them. I know there's questions. How about this? Does someone want to start by volunteering what was they thought was the most important thing they learned, or the most interesting thing they learned from this? Nothing was new. You guys are ready to give this presentation. Okay, let's do a show of hands. Who's a freshman? Anyone? How about sophomores? Okay, we got juniors. Okay, and then seniors. Yeah, I know you guys. Okay, so for my sophomores, did this change any, like, kind of how you're thinking about your grades or the program? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some nods. How about juniors? I think this is probably the most important for you. Did this change any of your thought process or what you're prioritizing? Okay, and then for seniors, you guys are pretty much already done. And I think probably the most important thing for you guys is try to get those regular ones done before December 15th, which I told both of you. So, question?
Philip, when you applied the Yale, what was your strongest unique
Strongest.
application?
My strongest component, you think? I think it was probably, it's a good question. I think tying into that idea of like showing your hunger and your initiative and your area of interests, I had a pretty long both academic and extracurricular history of being really into politics and policy. I had done a lot of classes and kind of involvement in my community related to those areas. One of my teachers that was writing my application was my US politics teacher, who I had actually done some independent research with. So I had this like strong interest in government, politics, and policy. And one of the reasons I was so attracted to Yale was they have an excellent program for that, and I wanted to continue that work in New Haven. And so that was like a consistent theme through my application that I think showed like a clear message about why I wanted to go there. And then in my interview, I ended up having a super long interview that didn't really talk about me. We were just talking about current events because I had my interview, I think it was like 2 days after the 2016 election. So we were just talking about that with the interviewer, not anything about me. And I actually think that worked out really well because it tied into that broader theme of like, okay, this student is really interested in these areas. They have done this work in high school. They've identified specific parts of our university that highlights those particular skills, and that's why they've chosen this school. So I think having that neat thread that can tie your interests, your activities to the strengths of that school makes a ton of sense. And if you can sort of demonstrate that narrative, it's really strong. So a classic way to do that is like if you've done a summer program at a particular school and you want to continue that research and continue that work, that's super. Or I've seen students who have a specific area of interest. Maybe they are really interested in a certain type of history or a certain type of, I don't know, AI, computer programming. And there's a professor at that university who is one of the leaders in the field. And they can say, oh, I want to go to this university for a lot of reasons, but maybe the main reason is I want to research under this professor, or I want to learn more from this particular program. The universities love that because they want to see, like at the end of the day, colleges are kind of like people. They have egos, they get their feelings hurt. Like they want people that want to go there. They don't want people that are just kind of applying there for no reason. So if you can convince them, hey, I have all of these interests and all of these different things that make me want to go to this school and make me want to be an active participant of that school, they really, really like that. So I think that's probably what I'd say. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have something to add though.
Please, yeah.
So for the standardized test, you're not only like looking for SAT and ACT. Sometimes AP tests would be also really helpful for math programs, especially in computer science. You can take AP Calculus AB or BC. BC is a more advanced AP test for AB. And then we also have AP Statistics. So once you have those scores in the future, when you get into college, you can use the AP scores to replace your college credits so that you can take less general education college course, so that you can save more time to take more classes that you wanted to take instead of wasting your time on those like basic fundamental math course in the college. So taking AP tests are really essential to help you. That also makes you stand out if you have 5 out of 5 in the score.
That's a really good point. I think APs help your application, but like you were saying, they also make your life so much easier because a lot of schools will let you place out of certain requirements if you have a 5 or a 4 on the AP. So for example, like let's say at a given school, you need to take 36 courses to graduate, and maybe 25 or 28 of those courses are within your major or within your requirements. So you only have maybe 6 to 8 courses your entire 4 years, depending on the school, that you can use to explore or try things. Let's say you get a 5 on AP Spanish, that university might let you place out of your language requirement, which maybe requires you to take 4 semesters of a language. So just by getting that 5 on AP Spanish, you have freed up 4 additional courses that you can use to take areas you're interested in or go even deeper on your major. Or you might even be able to add a minor or a double major because you freed up those courses. So APs, it's like you get to the end of the year and you're like, okay, I can't wait to get rid of this. Like I just want to do the test and get over with it. But the difference between a 3 and a 4 or a 4 and a 5 could be totally freed up college schedule, which is super important. And you also again might be able to place out of some of the most annoying things, especially for pre-med students. 5s on AP Chem and AP Bio and AP Physics can often move you up a year in your pre-med process. So you're taking organic chemistry and the harder stuff earlier, which means you can do more fun stuff at the end of your year. Or you can start your med school applications earlier. So it does all add up. It's one annoying test, but it can really move the needle too. Anyone else?
Matthew. You don't have concept? DBT. Concept. Oh. 2시.
Well, if you guys have any further questions in the future, and when we're having our tutoring session, feel free to ask us. So we're available to answer
Yeah.
those questions anytime.
Absolutely. That's it. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Again, feel free to ask questions anytime, and regardless of where you are on the journey, good luck. It's all going to work out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.